Today's topic are the levels of self-care. So it's important that we practice self-care at different levels and that we don't get stuck on one level, because sometimes it's easy to start practicing self-care in one area and then neglect the other areas. The first level of self-care is the most basic, which is the physical level. And the aspects of physical self-care include getting enough sleep, drinking enough water, eating well-balanced meals, exercising regularly, cleansing regularly. And I include in physical a stable home environment, because it is really hard to follow some kind of schedule where we are eating well-balanced meals, where we are cleansing regularly, if we live in a precarious or uncomfortable situation. So I include a stable home environment in physical self-care, but many of these aspects we can connect to other levels of self-care, but I'm just separating them in a way that I find easiest to remember. So the next level of self-care is emotional. And emotional self-care is something that we can put off in the short term. Like, we can not process sadness or not process anger, but it will catch up to us. It's one of those things that piles up, and then when we least expect it, we end up having some kind of anxiety, or we have some kind of breakdown, or something in our life like starts going like really wrong because we're not processing emotions regularly. And I'm going to include in emotional self-care connection in our relationships. So we can have a lot of relationships, we can have friendships, we can communicate with people in our families regularly or people at work, but it doesn't mean that there's a connection. We can be in a lot of toxic relationships where the dynamics are not healthy, and they feel like they're draining our energy, or they feel like they're not life-giving or not reciprocal. So part of emotional self-care is having relationships where there is connection, where we feel like we can share with another person and we can have a reciprocal, equal, balanced, harmonious relationship where we feel like our soul is being fed, our self-esteem is not decreasing within the interaction. And in emotional self-care, I'm also going to include meaningful work, because again, we can have a lot of work to do and we can be working at something that pays the bills, but if we don't have meaningful work, it can drain us emotionally, where we end up having sadness and frustration and disappointment piling up over time in a way that could be decreased if we were doing meaningful work. So the next level of self-care is mental. Mental self-care is one of those things where I feel like it's so easy to neglect. Where with physical self-care, like, we can't go that long without showering or without brushing our teeth or without sleeping. Nobody could go long and feel comfortable. But with mental self-care, it is easy not to practice self-education. It's easy not to read or try to gain some kind of greater understanding and perspective on life. And when we neglect to do that, when we neglect to read about history or read memoir and self-educate in that way, our perspective can become constricted over time. And this can have the effect and the impact where we're living, but we have like maybe a lot of self-pity. We don't realize how other people are affected by our actions, or we don't realize what other people are going through. We don't have time for empathy or compassion because we are just focused on like just having the same perspective that we had yesterday and not trying to expand it, and then we become smaller over time. So when we're 20 years old, if we're not expanding our mental self-care, if we're not investing in that way, it may not affect us that much. But if we are getting older, we're getting into our 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, and we fail to invest in our mind in that way, then it can really negatively impact our relationships, our health, to the point where like we don't even realize that that's what's happening, is that we've neglected our mind over a long period of time. So the last level of self-care is spiritual. And spiritual self-care includes spending time in nature. It includes meditation and prayer. And I'm including in spiritual self-care dancing, singing, creativity, art, writing. These are things that we can get lost in that help us heal our auras. It helps us rebalance, realign. Spending time in nature is really important for our chakras, for our energetic system, to make sure that our meridian channels are clear, to make sure that we have positive energy coming in regularly. Meditation and prayer is really important with regards to organizing the mind, organizing thoughts, organizing the way that we process things, and the way that we connect through our mind, body, spirit connection. And creativity, art, writing, dancing, singing, these things are important because they've been passed down throughout human history for a reason. It helps us process things on a deeper level, often on an unconscious level. Dancing helps move energy through the body. Singing helps us clear our voice so that we can speak the truth. There's all these subtler aspects of when we practice spiritual self-care that are really important to invest in over time. And again, spiritual self-care is one of those things where it's easy to neglect and not realize how much it impacts our life until we are older and we've just gotten used to not praying or not being creative. And when we engage too much in our ego and we intellectualize everything, and we're always trying to fix things or get like a list of to-dos done, then our energetic system constricts and it shrinks, and we're not necessarily able to connect to life or the deeper aspects of life in the way that are most life-giving. And again, that will impact our health and our relationships as we get older, and even our level of success. So those are the 4 levels of self-care: physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual. Again, many of the specific aspects can be interchanged between the 4, but it's really important that we spread out our investments throughout these areas consistently, so that we're not becoming unbalanced over time. Thank you for listening. If you have any questions or comments, please leave them below. And I am sending you lots of blessings from Toronto.